Hi, in this video I'm going to show you how to customize your theme using something called CSS. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, and it allows us to do more advanced things with our themes beyond just changing images and color options that might be present within the customizer. And so this is the site that I'm going to be changing. It's just my personal site. And as you can see right now, I've got sort of a header up at the top, this menu bar, things like this. But I'm going to be making some other changes to it in the future, adding in a portfolio and sort of a grid layout. And so in order to do that, I actually want to switch themes from the current one that I'm using. And so I'm going to go ahead and start by actually finding that new theme that I'm going to switch to. And I've already picked the theme, and it's called Garfunkel. And so you can just go into themes and then go to live preview, just make sure it looks like what you want. Now this is a little bit dark for what I'm looking for. I'm not a big fan of the font here, and there are a couple other little things that I want to change. And then it looks like it's got different image here, but I'm thinking for now I'll just show you this is what it looks like with the default image. And so I'll probably switch to one of my custom images in a minute once I get this set up. Now whenever you do change themes, you do have to reset your menu locations, and so I'm just going to go in and do that before I activate it. As soon as you activate it, it will go live on the site, but then once it's live, we'll sort of start to customize it more and then make it just a little bit more refined towards what we're trying to accomplish with this site. So now that we've got the menu in place and it looks okay with the content here in the default options, we'll go ahead and save and activate. And now the next thing we have to do is we need to go to Plugins, Add New, and then we're going to add a CSS plugin. And so my setup's a little bit different here, but all you need to do is search for Custom CSS once you go to Add Plugins. And then you're going to look for the Modular Custom CSS plugin with this icon here. And then you'll just click the Install button. Once that completes, you'll just hit Activate, and then you'll be good to go. And so once we've got that in place, we're actually just going to go right back to the customizer. And now we can see this, and interestingly it looks like it automatically switched images for me again there, but we're going to try a couple different ones. So let's start with this one. This is the image I was using on that other site, and I'm not really feeling this look. It looks very zoomed in. It fades to black really soon at the top here, and it just gives the background kind of a dark look. So I'm going to try changing that, and now in order to do that we're going to use custom CSS. So you can see now that we've got that plugin activated, we have a custom CSS section here, and in here we can add basically basic little snippets of code that will allow you to customize different layout elements. And so I'm going to start by changing this font up in the header because I'm not really a big fan of that font. And so I'm going to just go back to the front end of my site. And then all you want to do is you want to hover over the specific thing that you want to change. So in this case, I want to change this specific text. So I'm going to make sure I'm hovered over that, right click, and then inspect element. Now this thing that comes up down here has on the left the HTML structure for your site. This is the code that WordPress generates that has all of your content. And then over on the right you can see the CSS styling that the theme has, as well as any custom styles that you've added. The way that this works with the CSS is that you have the selector up at the top, in this case blog title A, and then you have all of the different rules for what styles to apply to that selector. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, since I want to change this blog title styling, I'm just going to copy blog title A. Then I'm going to hop over to the customizer, paste that in. You need braces around each of your different rules within that selector. And then we're going to change the font. So we'll do font-family. And I'm going to actually go with Times New Roman. Okay, and as you can see, that updated there. And I actually do like Times New Roman as a font. Of course, it is very commonly used. One thing that I don't like though is I think it looks better if it's not bolded, so I'm going to set the font weight to normal. And of course spelling does count, and then you can see that automatically will change that, and that's looking a lot nicer to me now. The next one that I want to change is I want to also change this tagline below the title. And looking over here I can see that's called blog-subtitle. And since this is, I want to have the same style changes for this as I have for my blog title, I'm just going to add a comma and then blog subtitle. And now you can see that that has the same thing. I do want to unitalicize that though, so I'm going to also add font style as normal. And there you go. So you can see that looks a little bit cleaner, and I think that's going to fit my design for the site a little bit better than what the theme had by default, especially with the image that I'm putting behind here. One other change I want to make on this is because I know I'm going to have the image is a little bit lighter than the one that the theme defaults to, and so you can see if you look closely there is sort of a shadow around the text in the header. I'm going to make that a little bit darker. So if we go back to here, you can see when you go back to the rules for the blog title that there's this text shadow property. I'm just going to copy that and then paste the whole thing in here. And then in order to darken it, this last part here where it says RGBA 000 and 0.1, that's actually a color. And so 000 is black, and then the last number there is the alpha channel, and that's for transparency. And so since I want to darken it, I'm just going to bump that up from 0.1 to 0.25. And so you can see there, if you look very closely on the right, that makes just a little bit of a difference. It's a little bit easier to see the text now, and if I do end up with a lighter image on the background there, it'll be easier to see. So now that that first change has been made, I'm just going to hit save and publish, pop back over here and hit refresh, and then we can see that that change is now live on the website. So next I want to change this background. I'm really not a huge fan of this dark background color, but I do want to keep sort of the fade out gradient effect that's happening here. And so this is a little bit more complicated to change. Depending on what the theme is that you're customizing and exactly what changes you're making, it may be easier or more difficult, but I will go ahead and quickly go through how to change this. So we're going to start just by figuring out where this color is located. So it looks like we've got that on credits, but if you mouse over it, you can see that's only this bottom strip here. Knowing how most themes work, it's probably also on the body with that background color, and we can confirm that right here. And so let's start by, for both of those, assigning a new color to them. And so body, which is an element, which is why it doesn't have the dot, but then credits is actually a class on the element. And so if you know anything about CSS and HTML or have any background in that, you'll know a little bit more about how this works. But I encourage looking into that if you are interested in getting into custom CSS more. And we're going to set the background to a lighter color, and I already picked a color here, and it's E8 EBEF. And then if we look down at the bottom, it looks like it got that down on the credits, but we still have to deal with this gradient and this middle part because that's still dark. And so the next one that I'm going to do is I'm going to look at where that might be. So I'm just going to right click on this area over in the margin, and that's on the wrapper. And it looks like the wrapper itself doesn't have the color, but if you look here, it says wrapper and then the colon and before, and it's actually set a background gradient on the before element. And then below that you also can see wrapper after, and that's just setting a solid color. And so the after part is down below here, and the before part is up above where we have. So because this after part just has the same thing as what the previous ones we did had, it just has that background color change, I'm just going to add that to right here. So we also have dot wrapper colon after. Oops. And then you can see now that gets most of it, and we just have this gradient part that needs to be changed. And so that's the wrapper before. And for this, you can see most of these rules here are crossed out. That's because this theme's using several different methods of setting that gradient. There are only two that we need still right now. In fact, actually, we only need this one. And that's just this background property with the linear gradient. You can see some of these have prefixes like an O, an MS, or a WebKit. Those are just for different browsers, and some older browsers require things like that sometimes just to give more specific rules. So we're going to write wrapper before as the property here, and then our style is the background with this gradient. And then I'm going to replace the color parts of this gradient with my new color. And before we use the hex color code, now I'm just going to use the equivalent RGB code, and then I'm going to leave the alpha channels, or the A part of the RGBA, as they were here. So my new color is 232, 236, 240. And that's on the top side, so I don't think we saw much of a change there yet. And then I'm just going to put the same color in here. So 232, 236, 240, and it looks like I lost my thing here. There we go. So now you can see that that has updated the whole background, and now it's a lot lighter. Now the next change that I want to make here is I want to bump this gradient down so that you can see more of the image before it fades out. So to do that, I'm going to change wrapper after. So I'll just add another rule there. And I'm going to change the top property on that, and I'm going to set that to 700 pixels. And so now you can see that this solid color starts way down here, and we have the image all the way up to the top, but we do still need to move down the gradient part. And so to move down the gradient part on wrapper before, we're going to add top, and this one I'm going to put at 800 pixels, and that's just based on the numbers that the theme already has in place. Sorry, it's actually looking like that didn't work though, so we're going to try changing the height of that. There we go. So actually what we're going to do here is we're going to spread that gradient out so that it's a more gradual fade, and then you can see that has a nice slow fade from the image into this solid color at the bottom of the page. And then one other thing, you can kind of play around and see if that causes any issues. In this theme, that does cause these links in the footer to show up like white on a really light gray when you mouse over them. So I'm just going to add in a couple of rules to fix that as well. I'm going to set these to the accent color that was an option in the theme. So I'm just going to bump up here, copy that color, and paste it into my CSS. And then it looks like we now have that red, so that's good to go. And so now I think I'm pretty satisfied with the way that this background color has changed now. So I'm going to go ahead and again save and publish. Come over here and hit refresh. And now it looks like we've got that new effect with the much lighter colors on the theme, which really brightens it up in my opinion. Now at this point I'm looking at it and I'm liking the background image that I have in place, but I think I have another one that's going to work a little bit better, especially with this new color and sort of the lighter look. So I'm going to bump into header image and just try this one out instead. Okay, yeah, I think that's a little bit better. It's a little bit cleaner, and that makes this red accent color pop a little bit better. So we'll try that one. Of course, things like header images are always really easy to change, so even if you are doing all of this custom CSS and more involved customization, you can still change things like header images really easily depending on the way the theme sets it up. So now again, I'll just go ahead and publish that change over to here. And now that I have that, I have a couple things I want to adjust about this image. The first thing I notice is that as I scroll, the image starts scrolling as well. I want to fix it in place so that it doesn't move as you scroll. And so to do that, we're going to set the background attachment property to fixed. And I happen to know that this is on the BG image selector. And it's also master. So we're going to set background attachment to fixed. And you can see that bumped that image a little bit, and now when I scroll, the image stays in place instead of scrolling with the content. Next, I'm also noticing that the image is a little bit too faded out at the top. So if we go BG shader, oh, that's also master. And then we'll set the background on this to transparent. Okay, and that just brightens it up significantly just with that one little change there. So I think that's actually looking much nicer now. So again, we'll go ahead and save and publish. Hit refresh over here, and there we go. Okay, and now a couple more little changes. There's a lot of extra white space at the bottom, and that's because I'm not using widgets. So I'm going to go ahead and just hide that with display none. And there we go, so that'll clean up the bottom of the site a little bit. And finally, I want to make this menu bar a little bit shorter. It's taking up a little bit too much space for my taste right now. So to do that, I'm just going to, again, right-click Inspect Element to drill down to what that property is. And it looks like it's main menu LIA. The padding is 27 pixels right now. So we'll copy that over here, and I'm going to change the padding to be 20 pixels on the top. But then if you write a second number, 27 pixels, that'll maintain the horizontal spacing as it is. So that's looking pretty good there. So as you can see, with just a few changes here, we've actually gotten a much different look out of this theme. And I'm really pleased with how this is looking right now. If I sort of navigate to the different pages, then I can see how it looks there. At this point, you can continue doing more advanced things like animations or anything else. And I will continue by just doing a quick example of an animation now. Okay, so to go ahead and add an animation in here, what I want to animate is I want to actually animate this whole white box. And when the page loads, I want that to sort of fade in and slide in so that you see a little bit more of the background image before you actually see the content. But then once the content is loaded and displayed, then you see just the content and it's not transparent or anything. Now, an alternate way to do that would be to just add some transparency to this content area. So I'm just going to see what that would look like really quickly. So I'm going to basically take this color and add an alpha channel to it. So I'm going to use RGBA, and then 255, 255, 255 is white. And then the last number for transparency, if it's just 1, then it's going to be solid. If we do something like 0.8, you can see a little bit there, that's a little bit transparent, but it's pretty solid still. But you know, you could do something more like 0.5 where it's more see-through. So that's an option, but I think I'd rather just keep this simple, make this just solid white. Oops. So that'll just look like this. And then instead of doing that, we'll just fade it in when the page first loads. So to do that, we're going to go back to the customizer and then back to our custom CSS here. And then I'm just going to add onto the bottom here a section for the animation. This notation with the slashes and the asterisks is just used to make a comment in the CSS code. And then for this is actually something that does require 2 separate rules that basically say the same thing, and that's just because certain browsers haven't implemented this animations in CSS the same way just yet, and that's just because it's a newer concept. And so this first part is actually going to define the animation, and so it's the keyframes property, and actually we also have to name it, so I'm going to call this content fade in. And then basically what we're going to do is we're going to set a couple of different percentages up here, and this is basically the rules that are going to be applied at each percentage of the way through the duration that we set for the animation. So you could actually make one animation and then use it in multiple different places with different timings, but in this case I'm just going to use this one for this one place. And so we're going to start with the opacity at 0, so that'll be completely faded out. And then I'm also going to give it a margin on the top, and that way I'll be able to slide up the vertical position so it looks like it's sort of fading in and sliding in at the same time. Now I want it to finish sliding in before it finishes fading in, so I'm going to set my 33%, so a third of the way through. At that point I want the margin top to be back to 0, which would be the default value. But then the opacity I'm going to wait until we get 100% of the way through the animation, and so it'll be animating it for the entire duration of the animation that we set. And so we'll set that back to 1 at 100%. And now that we have the keyframe set up, we're going to go ahead and just do our standard selectors here. So it's the post object, and then there's also a way to do it for pages here. And then we're going to use the animation property. In this case I'm also going to use WebKit animation. And since I'm using Google Chrome, which is one of the browsers that's a WebKit browser, and so it may or may not have implemented it yet, a lot of mobile browsers are also using WebKit, and so oftentimes you'll see more cases where you still need WebKit prefixes, but you may not need the ones for Firefox anymore, for example. And so we have our duration, so I'm going to try like 1.5 seconds here, and then the name of the animation, so that was content fade in. And then you can see that it just happened there, and then the number of times to run the animation, which is going to be 1. And then for both of these, actually let's play with it a little bit first and see whether we like it, and then if we do, we'll make sure we get the unprefixed versions added to the CSS also. So in order to re-trigger the animation, you just need to do something that's going to cause it to not actually be a real CSS property that's going to work, and then fix it back. So I'm just going to change this here. And so you can see just by changing that back and forth, we can trigger that animation, and it kind of fades in, slides in like I was saying. And I kind of like that. And the key use case for this, of course, is going to be navigating between pages. So if I try going to a different page here, you can see that makes that transition look a little bit smoother. And I think the fading fits in nicely with the way I have this sort of fade into the solid background color as well. You have to be really careful with your timings on this. So like, let's say we wanted to see what it would look like slower. So that's at 5 seconds. That's too slow because the user's just going to be sitting there waiting for the animation to finish. So you want it to be long enough that you can see it and it looks intentional, but also not too long where it becomes annoying. And so we can also try maybe if it's like 1 second or even half a second. That looks a little bit fast because then you can't really see what's happening and it looks kind of unintentional. And 1 second also feels a little fast for me, so I'm going to go back. I think 1.5 seconds is just about right. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it there, hit save and publish. And now if I go back to my site here, we'll see that that's now in place. So when we load different pages, we get that nice little animation fading in. So I've gone through a few different ways you can customize your site with CSS. As you can see, there are a lot of possibilities, and it's really endless. I will note that most themes use CSS to define their original layouts, of course, and so anything that you're adding in addition to that is just going to make it more custom and be able to make you fit your site more towards your personality. So when you're browsing themes, just keep in mind, while the theme does lock in a lot of things, especially around the layout and the types of content that it displays, you can definitely customize it towards your needs, depending on what you're looking to do. If you have any additional questions or want some more help with custom CSS, stop by the help desk in ANN 301.